What if, just for a moment, you could stand in the shadowed streets of ancient Rome on the very night whispers began about Julius Caesar's fate? Imagine hearing a rumor so sharp it feels like a cold hand on your shoulder. Would you follow it, or look away? Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a Rome that doesn't quite feel settled. A city breathing in heavy, uneven rhythms beneath a sky the color of cooling iron. You move through it slowly, noticing how every sound feels a little sharper than it should. Soft sandals brushing stone, distant carts rattling over uneven streets, even the mutter of a passing crowd. And you get this strange sense, like if you were a real Roman right now, you probably wouldn't survive this kind of tension for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening from somewhere far away, let me know your city and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping into Rome beneath ominous skies, as if the weather itself has overheard the secrets everyone's pretending not to speak aloud. The air hangs thick with early morning haze, carrying the scent of damp stone, olive oil, and a faint whisper of wood smoke. It's familiar, lived in, almost comforting, until you catch the ripple of tension threading through the streets. People walk faster, look shorter, speak quieter. Even the stray dogs seem to sense something brewing. They skulk rather than trot. You're not quite sure when you start noticing the unease. Maybe it's the forum merchants, usually loud and flamboyant, who keep glancing up at the Capitoline Hill as though expecting thunder or a decree at any moment. One man selling figs mutters that the gods have been restless lately. He doesn't elaborate, just shrugs in a way that makes you want to keep moving. Mainstream history tells you this. Julius Caesar has returned to Rome as its unrivaled power. A man who's won wars, rewritten laws, and reorganized nearly every corner of the Republic. He's the sort of figure who commands the street just by existing. But you feel the friction beneath that victory. The senators uneasy with his expanding authority. The old families worried they're being nudged aside. The proud Republic trembling at the edges. It's the kind of collective discomfort you don't need anyone to explain. It hangs in the air like humidity. As you cross the forum, you catch sight of a group of young men clustered beneath a colonnade. They're trying too hard to look casual. One of them whispers, "He's becoming a king in everything but name." Another hisses back, "Lower your voice, fool." You pretend not to hear, but their words stick to you like dust. Historians still argue whether Caesar genuinely aimed for monarchy or whether his enemies simply feared he did. But to the Romans living this moment, the distinction feels dangerously irrelevant. A breeze shifts, stirring your tunic, and you look up toward the clouds. They move strangely, as if sliding sideways rather than drifting forward. A quirky detail floats across your mind. Roman augurs once tracked bird patterns for signs of divine favor, but some citizens also believe the shape of clouds could predict fate. Someone nearby mutters that the gods are drawing a warning across the sky. Another scoffs that it's just weather, though his voice cracks on the last syllable. Your feet carry you closer to the Senate House, where the marble glows faintly even in the dim light. The building feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. Around it, more whispers travel in quick, nervous strands. Rome isn't a city of quiet voices. You know that much already, so the hush unsettles you. It's as if the whole population is tiptoeing through the morning. A group of senators emerges from the shadows of a portico, their togas swaying. You notice how sharply they look over their shoulders. One of them, a thin man with silvering hair, drops a scroll he's been clutching. He bends to grab it, but his hands tremble. A colleague steadies him and murmurs something too soft to catch. They hurry off together, their steps too fast to be casual. You wander past a statue of Pompey, its stern expression frozen in stone. Someone has placed a small offering at its base. A sprig of laurel, a splash of wine, a tiny clay figurine of a wolf. Strange combination. A local tradition? A symbolic plea? Hard to tell. Rome is full of superstitions, and today they seem dialed up to 11. You can't shake the feeling that something is drawing energy from the city's nerves. A baker steps out of his shop, dusting flour from his arms. He looks at the sky, frowns, and mutters that a flock of ravens gathered on the Capitoline that morning, an omen usually associated with death. Raven omens weren't standard practice, but Romans loved interpreting anything that flapped, slithered, or shimmered. You can't decide whether he's exaggerating, but the thought unsettles you anyway. As you continue, you pass by a fountain where water trickles lazily over carved stone. A woman filling a clay jug leans toward you. "Have you noticed?" she whispers. "The city feels wrong today." You're tempted to make a joke about your horoscope, but her eyes are too earnest. And the truth is, you've felt it since the moment you arrived. Something simmers beneath the cobblestones, beneath the sandals, beneath every hushed conversation. Near the temple of Castor and Pollux, a small crowd gathers around a traveling storyteller. He waves his arms dramatically, claiming the gods have sent signs. "Lightning struck near the Palatine yesterday," he insists. "Unseasonal storms, unnatural winds. Mark my words, change is coming to Rome." People listen, half entertained, half afraid. You feel the weight of their fear ripple outward. You try to reason through it. Maybe the tension is just politics. Maybe Rome has always been like this, loud, competitive, dramatic, always on the verge of something. But the longer you walk, the more the atmosphere presses in. Even the marble seems colder today. The city, proud and sprawling, feels like a beast pacing in a cage. You stop near the edge of the forum, listening to the murmuring crowd. Their voices weave together. Concern, curiosity, quiet dread. You overhear a merchant speculate that Caesar's enemies are plotting something reckless. Another insists Caesar is untouchable. A third says the gods themselves will intervene soon. It's a cacophony of fear, hope, pride, and superstition, and it wraps around you like a cloak. For a moment, you imagine you could step out of time entirely, whisper in someone's ear, warn them what history is about to record so vividly. But you can't. You're just here to observe. One quiet figure moving through a Rome stirred by unseen currents. And tonight, those currents are flowing straight toward one man. You move deeper into the city's heart, where the marble halls of Rome stretch upward like pale ribs, echoing with footsteps that don't quite sound steady. Whispers in marble halls. That's the feeling pressing in on you now. A sense that every conversation is clipped too short, every glance darted too quickly, every senator suddenly very interested in things that absolutely do not require that much staring. You follow a shaded corridor along the edge of the forum, where the cool air gathers in pockets, and where gossip tends to pool like rainwater. The first thing you notice is how the senators' voices rise and fall not in heated debates, as they usually do, but in furtive bursts, small, nervous sparks of conversation quickly smothered. You catch fragments as you drift past. "He's gone too far. The crown? No, impossible. But the people? Quiet. Someone's listening." You resist the urge to wave cheerfully and confirm their suspicion. Instead, you linger at the edge of a column as casually as someone pretending not to overhear can manage. A mainstream historical fact slips naturally into your awareness. Caesar had recently accepted the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, a move that many Romans found unsettling even if they admired him. Dictatorship itself wasn't unusual. Rome appointed dictators in emergencies all the time, but for life, that felt like something new, something edging too close to monarchy. And Rome, for all its drama, had very firm feelings about kings. Mainly, no thank you. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a small group of senators clustered in the alcove of a temple portico. Their togas, pristine and heavily folded, swish as they lean together. One gestures sharply with a hand that trembles just enough to betray him. He parades like a god. The man hisses. "The purple, the laurels. What's next?" Another mutters back. "You know what's next. He just hasn't said it yet." A third tries to shush them, eyes flicking across the corridor. You catch his gaze, and for a second, the two of you share a tiny moment of mutual acknowledgement. Yes, this is awkward. No, neither of us will admit we heard anything. Historians still argue whether Caesar truly intended to dismantle the Republic or simply reform it, whether he sought a throne or merely the stability required to govern an expanding empire. But the senators around you aren't debating abstract political theory. They're calculating the fast approach of something that feels like losing control. You drift away before they realize how much you picked up. As you walk, two servants carrying wax tablets hurry past, whispering fiercely. Cassius said he won't wait much longer, one murmurs. The other replies, and Brutus? Will he join? You can't help the tiny jolt in your chest at hearing those names. For now, though, you feign indifference. Rome is full of men named Cassius and Brutus. Maybe they mean a different pair. Totally possible. Absolutely plausible. Not suspicious at all. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Romans sometimes believed that architecture could listen. Certain arches, they said, captured whispers and carried them farther than intended. Standing between these giant columns, you start to wonder whether some unlucky whisper might bounce its way straight into the wrong ears. Considering what's being whispered right now, that's a fun little thought experiment. For someone in a completely different timeline. You pause before an enormous statue of Roma, her helmet gleaming in muted sunlight. A small group of orators debates beneath her, but it doesn't sound like their usual theatrical speeches. Their tones are low, tense, clipped. One man insists that Caesar's reforms are necessary, that the Republic is too fractured to govern itself efficiently anymore. Another counters that power held too long by one man corrupts both him and the state. A third insists none of this concerns him as long as the wine merchants stop overcharging. You appreciate his energy. You walk on, and the marble beneath your feet reflects soft light upward, giving the hallway a faint, dreamlike glow. The glow does nothing to hide the tension in people's shoulders, though tension so clear that if it had a sound, it would hum. At the entrance to another hall, you find a philosopher perched on a step, rearranging scrolls with exaggerated care. He glances up at you and says, "All this worry over one man's power, as if the Republic hasn't survived worse." You nod politely and he adds, "Though admittedly, perhaps not much worse." He gives a tight smile, as though trying to convince himself the joke landed. You wander deeper, and the air cools even further. The voices soften until they're almost indistinguishable murmurs, blurring into a kind of low-frequency anxiety. You slow your pace. There's something absorbing about watching the powerful try to hide their fear. A senator with impeccably groomed hair rushes past, nearly dropping a ring he fidgets with. You overhear him muttering, "It must be stopped. It must." Not the words of a confident statesman. More like someone rehearsing a decision he hasn't fully accepted. A small group of scribes stands nearby, pretending to review documents. "He refused the diadem again," one whispers, in front of the crowd. Another scoffs. "A show. Everything's theater with him." The third squints as he seals a tablet. Still, the people cheered. Their exchange lingers in your mind like incense. Was Caesar refusing the crown out of humility? Politics? Strategy? Historians still argue whether the gesture was genuine reluctance or a calculated test of public appetite. Ahead, you spot a flicker of vibrant purple fabric, a color reserved for the highest honors. Caesar's personal attendants pass through, carrying a stack of folded garments and laurel wreaths. The sight makes the nearby senators stiffen. One of them mutters something about divine pretensions. Another counters, "Better a god than a tyrant." Their bickering stalls when they see you watching. Just when you think the whispers couldn't get any sharper, a young messenger dashes through the corridor, nearly tripping over his own feet. He spills a handful of wax tablets across the floor. As he scrambles to collect them, he grumbles, "Why can't they just say what they mean? Everyone keeps talking like they're being chased." You sympathize with him deeply. Somewhere behind you, a door slams. The sound echoes down the stone passageway, and every head turns. For one long second, the hall freezes. Then, slowly, the conversations resume, but quieter this time, as though someone turned the tension knob up one more notch. You continue your slow journey, absorbing the shifting glances, the guarded words, the strained laughter. Rome isn't subtle today. Beneath all the marble and ceremony, the fear is naked. This isn't mere political rivalry. There's something deeper, something bending the air around you. You leave the hall behind you, steps echoing, and realize these whispers aren't fading. They're gathering momentum, and whether the senators admit it aloud or not, the storm they fear is already forming. You step back into the open air, where Rome stretches before you in restless motion, but your attention keeps pulling toward one figure whose presence seems to bend the entire city around him. Caesar's stride through storms. That's the rhythm you fall into now, watching the man at the center of all this tension move with a confidence so solid it feels almost unreal against the trembling atmosphere. If the senators are shadows flickering in the marble halls, Caesar is the torch that throws them into sharp relief. You make your way through a crowded street where citizens part instinctively as a small procession approaches. At its center, Julius Caesar walks with a pace that's neither hurried nor slow, just steady, purposeful, assured. His white toga, edged with purple, brushes the ground like a deliberate stroke of paint. A wreath of laurel crowns his head, glinting faintly each time he angles toward the morning light. You're close enough now to study his expression. Not smug, not oblivious, but focused, as though he's tracking something only he can see. A mainstream historical detail settles neatly into your thoughts. Caesar had survived countless battles, outmaneuvered political rivals, and returned from civil war as the uncontested leader of Rome. This walk, calm, direct, feels like the natural stride of someone who's always managed to stay 2 steps ahead of his enemies. Yet the air around him trembles with a tension even he can't quite cut through. As he passes, you notice that his attendants keep glancing at the sky. Dark clouds still gather in strange, ragged shapes, as if pulled toward some invisible center. One servant mumbles, another omen, and another shushes him sharply. Rome has always been a city where storms carry meaning, but today the weather feels uncomfortably literal, like the atmosphere is mirroring the political tempest swirling through every whispered conversation. You follow at a respectful distance, weaving through clusters of Romans who bow their heads or stare openly. A few seem eager, admiring. Others step back as though proximity itself is risky. An older man near you murmurs. He walks like a king, and his companion replies, "Say that too loudly and you'll vanish." You pretend not to hear, but the comment sits heavy in your chest. As Caesar approaches the forum, a gust of wind kicks up, sending dust swirling around his sandals. You catch a brief flicker of irritation in his eyes, just a spark, and then it's gone. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. Caesar was famously superstitious and famously dismissive of superstition, depending entirely on the mood of the moment. He once tripped while disembarking a ship, considered it a bad omen, then quickly reframed it by clutching the earth and declaring he now held Africa. Rebranding the omen, very on brand for him. Whether he's doing the same internal gymnastics now, you can't tell. As he ascends a set of stone steps leading toward one of the temples, a small crowd gathers. A few senators stand nearby, stiff and polite. Caesar greets them with a nod that manages to be both warm and dismissive. You watch the way those men react, their cheeks tightening, their jaws clenching. If Caesar notices, he doesn't show it. Then something subtle shifts. A roll of thunder mutters through the clouds. Caesar glances upward, just briefly, and for a heartbeat you sense hesitation. His stride slows by half a step, not enough for most people to see, but you're watching carefully now. The moment passes quickly, replaced by his usual measured pace. Still, the tiny hitch lingers in your mind like a bookmark. Historians still argue whether Caesar believed in the omens that seemed to cluster around his final days, or whether he dismissed them as theatrics meant for the superstitious masses. Some claim he felt a creeping sense of inevitability. Others insist he ignored every warning with the stubborn rationality of a general who had survived too much to fear shadows. As you watch him move, you suspect both could be true. A pair of children run past you, chasing each other with sticks shaped like swords. One shouts, "I'm Caesar," while the other responds, "Then I'm Pompey," and lunges dramatically. Adults nearby wince, torn between humor and discomfort. A few years ago, that game might have earned a laugh. Today, the name Pompey carries the ghost of civil war. It floats behind Caesar like an unwelcome reminder. You trail the procession as it winds toward the forum's center, where statues cast long, jagged shadows. Caesar stops to address a group of scribes. His voice is low but clear, commanding without shouting. "See that the petitions are delivered by noon," he says. The scribes bow deeply. Even from where you stand, you can see they're sweating. Whether from heat or nerves is hard to tell. Suddenly, a hush falls over the area. A man rushes forward, a senator, judging by his attire, holding out a folded parchment. "A message for you, Caesar," he says, breathless. Caesar takes it, glances at it, and pockets it without reading. The senator's eyes widen, a silent plea flickering across his face. But Caesar waves him away with a polite but dismissive gesture. You catch the man's whisper as he steps back. He won't listen. He never listens. His voice cracks, revealing something deeper than frustration, something like fear. A young woman beside you mutters, "He shouldn't ignore warnings today." You turn slightly toward her. She's clutching a small bronze charm shaped like a thunderbolt, meant to ward off ill omen. You ask quietly, "Why today?" She meets your gaze and replies, "Because the gods are speaking loudly, and he's pretending they aren't." Then she hurries off before you can ask more. The procession continues toward the Capitoline, and you keep pace, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing against you. Caesar carries his authority like armor, and yet, there's a fissure somewhere, not visible but sensed. The way the wind shifts around him, the way people watch him, too intently, too nervously. Another gust of wind rattles the laurel leaves on his wreath. They clatter softly, like tiny bones. It's an eerie sound, almost theatrical in timing. Caesar pauses once more, frowning slightly. He presses a hand to the wreath, steadying it. Then he moves on with renewed determination, as though refusing to let the world see him flinch. A small group of soldiers stationed nearby straighten as he passes. One whispers to another, "He looks tired." The other replies, "He looks invincible." Both statements hang in the air, neither fully true nor false. Caesar seems suspended between the two, mortal and monumental at the same time. You follow as he turns toward the Senate district, where the storm clouds thicken into a heavy ceiling above Rome. Lightning flashes silently behind them, illuminating the faint curve of Caesar's profile. He doesn't look back. He doesn't slow. He walks as though the path ahead is clear, even though you can feel, deep in your bones, that the ground beneath him is shifting. He strides forward, right into the heart of a storm he refuses to acknowledge. You trail Caesar's path only a short while longer before the city seems to swallow him into its noise, its alleys, its tangle of courtyards and colonnades. You slip away from the thickening crowd, down a quieter street where the echoes soften and the air feels strangely suspended. That's when the moment arrives, quiet, small, almost forgettable, yet destined to carve itself into history. The soothsayer's warning. You feel it before you see it. A subtle hush spreading through the bodies ahead of you, like ripples forming around a single pebble dropped into water. People begin stepping aside, clearing a narrow path. And at the end of that path stands an old man draped in rough, faded robes. His hair falls in wiry silver curls, his eyes sharp in a way that makes you want to look anywhere else. He isn't performing for a crowd, not begging, not chanting. He is simply waiting. A few citizens around you whisper, "It's the soothsayer again. And he stopped Caesar last week, too." Someone snorts. "He never listens." You're beginning to notice that's a recurring theme today. The soothsayer's gaze locks onto you for a fleeting moment, long enough to make the hairs on your arms rise, before shifting past you toward the approaching figure of Caesar. Even now, Caesar's stride is steady, confident, as though expecting to part crowds the way a prow splits water. But you can feel a tension gathering, an invisible rope tightening between the two men. When they finally stand before each other, Caesar stops. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the faintest hint of resigned annoyance. "What is it this time?" a senator near him mutters under his breath. The old man lifts one trembling hand. His voice, when it comes, is rough but crystalline, cutting through the air like a cold breeze. "Beware the Ides of March." You've heard those words in 1,000 history books, in plays, in dramatic retellings. But here, delivered in the raw quiet of a Roman street, they feel startlingly fragile. Not loud, not theatrical, almost conversational, as if he's reminding Caesar to avoid a pothole. Caesar studies him for a beat, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he smiles, tight-lipped, but amused. "He is a dreamer," he says lightly to those around him, "and I will leave him to his dreams." The people chuckle nervously, unsure whether to laugh or nod or simply pretend they didn't witness a prophecy casually tossed aside. Caesar steps around the old man and moves on without breaking stride. You linger. The soothsayer's eyes follow Caesar until he disappears around a corner. Then he exhales, long and slow, as though expelling something heavy from his chest. Without looking at you, he says softly, "Dreams speak in shadows. Men choose the sun." His voice holds the weight of someone who knows he won't be believed. A mainstream historical fact threads into your thoughts. Multiple ancient sources, Plutarch, Suetonius, and others, mention that a soothsayer warned Caesar to be cautious on the Ides of March. The details vary, as ancient history always does, but the warning itself is one of the most famous premonitions in Western memory. Yet something else nudges at you, something curious, almost humorous in an unsettling way. A quirky tidbit. Romans believed certain days carried a numen, a spiritual charge, and the Ides were considered a time for settling debts, both financial and karmic. Some clever merchant probably joked once that you should never borrow money you can't repay by the Ides. Today, the concept feels far less funny. You step closer to the soothsayer. He notices but doesn't recoil. He simply watches you, his gaze softening as though he recognizes an ally of quiet observation. "You sense it too," he says. You blink. You didn't speak. The air feels thin today. Even the birds fly crooked. You think he's exaggerating, until a crow swoops overhead in a bizarre arc, landing clumsily on a nearby beam. A few Romans cross themselves or murmur quick prayers. The soothsayer nods subtly, as though this confirms something for him. You ask, "Do you think Caesar believes you?" "Even a little." He chuckles, a dry, papery sound. "Great men hear only what agrees with them. A warning is a pebble thrown at a mountain." His expression shifts to something that almost resembles sympathy. But the mountain still feels the pebble. You're about to reply when a pair of lictors strides toward you, their fasces glinting in the filtered light. They give the soothsayer a look that hovers between disdain and boredom, the way officials regard a nuisance they can't quite remove. One mutters, "Move along, old man. Caesar isn't interested in your riddles." The soothsayer bows his head but doesn't speak. They continue on, hardly noticing you. Historians still argue whether the soothsayer truly foresaw danger or whether he drew from political intuition, reading the signs of tension already brewing in Rome. Perhaps prophecy and political insight weren't such different things after all. Rome, after all, was a place where augury, superstition, and strategic guesswork overlapped constantly like layers of wax tablets. The soothsayer turns his back to the dispersing crowd and walks toward a shaded colonnade. You follow at a distance, curious. He stops at the base of a pillar, tracing his fingers over a faded symbol etched into the stone. An old mark worn almost invisible. "This city forgets quickly," he murmurs. "It forgets warnings and storms and the cost of ambition." You wonder whether he's speaking to you or to the stone itself. A group of teenagers, puffed up with self-importance, saunter past and mock him with exaggerated gestures. "Beware the Ides," one cries, waving his arms like a spooked chicken. The others laugh. The soothsayer simply closes his eyes, the humor rolling off him like dust. You take a seat on a nearby step, absorbing everything. Caesar's confidence, the crowd's unease, the soothsayer's quiet seriousness. The contrast between them forms a strange emotional triangle. Caesar, the unstoppable force. The senators, brittle with fear. The soothsayer, resigned but persistent. You find yourself wondering, if you were Caesar, victorious, adored, endlessly praised, would you heed a warning from a lone old man? Would you pause, even once, to question why someone risked ridicule just to deliver a message? Above you, the clouds churn again, darker now. The wind picks up, curling around your shoulders like cool fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls. A long, wavering note that unsettles even the staunchly pragmatic Romans nearby. The soothsayer looks once more in the direction Caesar left, his mouth tightening. A tide is turning, he says quietly, and tides do not ask permission. Then, just as quietly, he disappears into the deeper shade, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a warning Caesar has already chosen to ignore. You leave the soothsayer behind, letting his final words dissolve into the hum of the street. The air feels heavier now, as if Rome itself inhaled deeply but forgot how to exhale. You follow the sloping path toward Caesar's residence, the Domus Publica, a place that should feel grand, solid, reassuring. Instead, it sits draped in a tension you can sense long before you reach the door. Today, domestic shadows at the Domus stretch longer than usual. The entrance bustles with servants moving quickly, their sandals tapping out a jittery rhythm. They try to look composed, but their movements betray them. Clipped, hurried, a little too sharp. One drops a folded linen cloth and curses softly under his breath. Another nearly runs into you, apologizing with a nervous bow. The household is not at peace. Inside, the air is cooler, scented with olive oil and the faint mineral tang of fresh polished marble. Normally, this space would radiate authority, Caesar's home as the heart of political Rome. But today it feels like a vessel straining under unseen pressure. You hear voices in the next room, low and tense, drifting out like muffled heartbeats. You follow the sound and find Calpurnia. She stands by an open window, her silhouette framed in pale morning light. Her hands grip the window frame so tightly the tendons rise along her wrists. When she turns her head slightly, you see a heaviness in her expression. A look you've seen on people who wake from nightmares they're too afraid to describe. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Calpurnia did indeed experience troubling dreams before the Ides of March, dreams vivid enough that ancient writers made note of them. She begged Caesar not to go to the Senate on that day, claiming omens and visions foretold danger. In stories, she often appears as a figure of intuition, a quiet warning the world failed to heed. You approach slowly, letting your footsteps announce you. Calpurnia turns her gaze toward you, calm, composed, but her eyes betray her. They shimmer with the kind of fear that lives deep beneath logic. "He won't listen," she says softly, not as a complaint but as a simple truth. You wonder how often she's repeated that phrase today. She gestures you closer, lowering her voice as though afraid the walls might carry her words to someone ready to twist them. "The dreams came again last night." The house groaned. The doors opened themselves. "And I saw..." She pauses, swallowing. "I saw him pale and struck down in my arms." You feel a chill brush your spine. Before you can respond, a servant rushes past carrying a tray of figs, dropping one as he turns the corner. It rolls across the floor and bumps into your sandal. A tiny, harmless thing. Yet even this small disturbance feels amplified inside the domus. Calpurnia steps away from the window and begins pacing. "He dismisses it," she mutters. "He says dreams are nothing. Superstition. Shadows." She breathes out a shaky laugh. But even shadows come from something. A quirky Roman tidbit surfaces in your mind. Romans sometimes believed that dreams arriving just before dawn were prophetic, messages that slipped into the mind at the hour when the soul wandered most freely. Perhaps Calpurnia knows this. Perhaps that's why her voice trembles even when her posture stays straight. A door opens, and Caesar's physician enters carrying a small bowl of water infused with herbs. He nods politely to you before turning to Calpurnia. "He didn't sleep well," the physician says quietly. "Restless, disturbed." Calpurnia closes her eyes at that, her breath catching just slightly. He won't say it, the physician adds, but he feels the weight of something. You glance toward the doorway behind him, where you catch a glimpse of Caesar himself adjusting the folds of his toga. His face gives little away, but there is a flicker, just the faintest edge of fatigue beneath his composure. Calpurnia moves toward him before he can leave the room. "Please," she murmurs, her voice both gentle and fierce. "Do not go today. Stay home. Speak to the senators tomorrow." What is one day? The question hangs between them like incense smoke. Caesar hesitates. You see it. A moment where the unstoppable general pauses, caught between pride and something more fragile. But then he offers a small, reassuring smile, the kind he must use to settle crowds and soldiers alike. "My dear," he says, "if I let fear decide my steps, Rome would not stand where it stands today." Calpurnia's face tightens, her shoulders lifting with an almost invisible tremor. "This is not fear," she whispers. "This is warning." Historians still argue whether Calpurnia's pleas truly influenced Caesar, or whether they were later embellishments meant to dramatize the moment. Some say he briefly agreed to stay home. Others believe he never seriously considered it. In this moment, watching them face each other in the quiet tension of their home, you get the sense that both versions hold threads of truth. A servant enters bearing a message, a tablet sealed with wax. "From Decimus," she says, bowing. Caesar breaks the seal and reads. His expression shifts just slightly before he says, "He insists I attend the Senate. They are expecting me." Calpurnia steps back as though struck by a sudden wind. You sense an unspoken frustration ripple through the room. The physician bows and retreats. Two attendants appear behind Caesar, ready to accompany him wherever he goes. And Calpurnia, she looks at you, as if you, a stranger moving silently through her mourning, might somehow tip the balance. She places a hand on Caesar's forearm. "At least send word that you are unwell." He shakes his head. "I cannot show weakness today." Pride curls around his words like a second cloak. Calpurnia's shoulders sag. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal a fracture in her hope. You want to speak for her, plead on her behalf, say something like, "Actually, showing weakness occasionally is very relatable content." But you keep your thoughts tucked safely away. And then, unexpectedly, Calpurnia does something small but resolute. She takes Caesar's hand, lifts it, and holds it between her own. "If the gods speak through dreams," she says softly, "then let today be the one day you listen." Caesar's expression wavers only for a heartbeat. Then he gently withdraws his hand, kissing her forehead before stepping away. "I will return soon," he promises. But you feel the hollowness in his tone, the way promises sometimes shift under the weight of fate. As he exits through the archway, the house exhales all at once. Calpurnia stands alone in the center of the room, looking smaller than before. Shadows gather in the corners, pooling like dark water. You walk beside her to the window. Outside, the clouds churn again, and a sudden gust rattles the shutters. "Today feels wrong," she murmurs. "I feel it in my bones." You do too. You leave the domus with Calpurnia's fear still clinging to you like a thin layer of dust, and the moment your sandals meet the street again, Rome's energy feels different, sharper, more purposeful, as though the entire city is tightening a knot you can't quite see. Today, the political currents run deep, and you're about to step straight into them. Senators shape a plot, not with swords, not yet, but with whispers sharpened into intention. You follow a narrow side street leading away from Caesar's home, where the morning crowds thin and the walls rise closer together. The air grows cooler, quieter, almost conspiratorial. It's the kind of place where secrets tend to gather, like leaves in the corner of a courtyard. Ahead, you spot a group of senators entering the shadowed portico of a secluded villa. Their togas swirl behind them like pale banners. You recognize a few faces from earlier. Cassius, with a jaw clenched tight enough to fracture stone. Casca, fidgety and restless. And, trailing a step behind them, Marcus Junius Brutus, whose expression looks carved from conflict. You hesitate, then follow them at a distance. The villa's door closes, but a side entrance remains slightly ajar, as if inviting you to observe what history usually hides behind closed panels of cedar and ivory. Inside, the air is thick with murmuring voices. You step lightly across the polished floor, pausing near a curtain that doesn't fully meet the wall. Through that narrow gap, you see them, a circle of Rome's most powerful men, gathered not to debate policy as senators should, but to design the fate of a single man. Cassius speaks first, pacing with wide, cutting strides. "He will not stop," he says, his voice low but vibrating with fury. Each honor he accepts brings him closer to the throne. "Rome cannot breathe under one man's shadow," a younger senator mutters. Rome breathes well enough for the crowds cheering his every step. This earns him a glare sharp enough to peel bark. A mainstream historical fact rises into your thoughts. Cassius had long resented Caesar's rise, believing the Republic was collapsing into monarchy under his rule. Some sources even claim Cassius tried to recruit Brutus by reminding him of his ancestor who helped expel Rome's last king centuries earlier. And here, now, you watch Cassius turn toward Brutus with exactly that energy. "Marcus," Cassius says, voice slowing, softening. "You know what the Republic means. You know what your family stood for. If Caesar takes the crown, if he becomes king, Rome dies. And we die with it, not in body, but in purpose." Brutus doesn't respond immediately. His hands tighten at his sides. His eyes drop to the mosaic floor, tracing its geometric patterns as though trying to find stability in them. You find yourself leaning in, holding your breath. Casca, the most visibly anxious of the group, steps forward. He ignored another omen today. Storm clouds, thunder, warnings everywhere. Even Calpurnia fears for him. But he refuses to pause. He rubs his palms together, nervous energy sparking off him like static. What man refuses all warnings unless he believes himself untouchable? Another senator swirls the end of his toga thoughtfully. He builds monuments with his face on them. He seats himself like a king. Soon he will demand worship. A quirky historical tidbit flickers. Some Romans genuinely worried Caesar might reorganize the Republic into a divine monarchy, but others believed these fears were exaggerated, products of paranoid aristocrats losing influence. You look around this room and can't tell whether these men are patriots or fearful power brokers. Maybe both. Cassius gestures sharply, bringing the discussion to its dangerous point. "We cannot wait. The Ides are upon us." He goes to the Senate today. We strike there, swiftly, decisively. A silence falls so heavy you almost feel it touch your skin. Brutus closes his eyes. You watch something shift in him, something subtle, fragile. He looks like a man standing at the edge of a high cliff, trying to decide whether the wind pushing at his back is a warning or encouragement. Historians still argue whether Brutus joined the conspiracy out of idealism, manipulation, ego, or fear. Was he the noble defender of the Republic that later stories made him? Or was he simply swept into the plot by Cassius's relentless persuasion? Here, in this moment, his conflict feels painfully human. Finally, Brutus speaks. "Caesar loves me," he says quietly, "and I respect him. But Rome is greater than any friendship, greater than any man." He lifts his gaze. If he seeks the crown, he must be stopped. For the Republic. Cassius exhales sharply, relief flooding his features. Casca straightens. The mood shifts rapidly, from tense uncertainty to grim resolve. You step back instinctively. The air in the room feels colder now, charged, as though lightning has entered through the walls and settled into their bones. The group leans in together, forming a tight circle. They whisper rapidly, names, positions, signals, timing. You catch fragments. Metellus will draw him aside. Then Casca strikes first. 20 men, no escape. Pompey's theater is ideal. We make him understand the Republic's strength. Their voices sharpen, losing hesitation. Men who moments ago trembled now stand firm, galvanized by the momentum of collective conviction. As you listen, a strange image flickers into your mind, a callback to the children earlier who playfully reenacted battles in the street. Those children fought with sticks, laughing. These men speak of blades with no laughter at all. A senator near the window suddenly stiffens. Someone's outside. Your heart leaps. But after a tense pause, they realize it's only a stray dog knocking over a clay jug. Nervous chuckles flutter through the room. Brief, hollow. Cassius wipes a hand across his forehead. Then it's settled. Today we act. Brutus nods once, but his face has gone pale. You sense he's the one who will carry the heaviest burden. Not in action but in spirit. You step back further into the corridor, your sandals barely whispering against the floor. As you move away, the senators' voices fade behind you, but the weight of what you've heard does not. Outside, the light has dimmed. Clouds hang low, pressing the city downward. Rome feels smaller, tighter, as though its walls can no longer contain what's coming. A servant hurries past you holding a tray of figs. Again with the figs today, you note, but he stops to bow to two passing senators who exit the villa with renewed resolve. Their faces look carved from iron. You realize then that Caesar isn't the only one walking into a storm. Rome is too. Night settles over Rome like a woolen cloak, heavy, uneven, carrying the faint scent of smoke and damp stone. You stand at the edge of a quiet street, watching torches flicker against the darkening sky. Nightfall before the Ides feels different from every other Roman night you've wandered through. There's still the usual hum of taverns, the distant calls of vendors closing shop, the clatter of wagons rolling home. But underneath all that, there's a tightness, a collective holding of breath, as though Rome, too, lies awake with something stuck behind its ribs. You walk slowly, feeling the uneven cobblestones beneath your sandals. The air cools as you near the forum, cool enough to raise the hairs on your arms. Shadows pool in the arches and corners, stretching long like ink spilled across parchment. A few lanterns sway in the breeze, their warm halos trembling over worn marble. Even the statues seem to tilt slightly toward you, as if listening. From a nearby alley, you hear two figures conversing in hushed tones. A pair of merchants may be judging by their cloaks. One mutters, "The Senate meets early tomorrow." The other replies, "Yes," and half the city feels uneasy. You don't interrupt. They speak like men who expect the world itself to eavesdrop. As you move past them, something flutters near your ear. A night bird swooping low. You startle, then exhale. A quirky tidbit drifts through your thoughts. Romans believed owls were harbingers of misfortune, their cries warning of approaching tragedy. Tonight, 3 different owls whistle from 3 different rooftops. You pretend not to notice, but Rome absolutely notices. Several windows shutter themselves. You reach the heart of the forum, which normally glows golden from torches and gatherings. Tonight it feels muted, subdued. A group of laborers huddles near a fountain, sharing bread. They murmur about the strange lightning earlier in the afternoon, about unsettling dreams, about a distant rumor that Caesar refused yet another warning. Historians still argue whether people truly sensed what was coming. You think, listening quietly, or whether the fear simply seeped backward into the record. But hearing these men tonight, their unease so natural, so unforced, you suspect history didn't exaggerate much. You turn toward the Capitoline slope, following the curve of a road lined with shuttered stalls. The faint smell of fish, spices, and baked bread clings to the air, remnants of a busy day settling into sleep. A lone cart creaks past you, pulled by a donkey who looks like he spent the entire week regretting his life choices. His handler yawns loudly enough to echo off the stones. It's the first normal sound you've heard in hours. You continue uphill and find a small tavern tucked between 2 tall insulae. Lamps glow softly inside. A musician plucks a cithara in a corner, the melody drifting out the open door like warm smoke. It's comforting, almost enough to soothe your nerves. But the patrons inside speak in voices heavy with tension. A soldier sits near the window, sipping watered wine. They say Caesar will address the Senate about expanding his powers, he murmurs. A baker snorts. He already has more powers than Jupiter. A farmer at the next table leans in. If the Senate opposes him, it'll mean war. The soldier shrugs. Or it'll mean nothing. Men talk big when they're safe behind columns. You slide into a corner bench, listening. Rome at night is a different creature, looser, more candid. People speak more honestly when the moon is their witness instead of the crowd. The door opens, and two young scribes enter, still wearing dusty sandals. One collapses at a table and rubs his face. Brutus was in the archives late, he mutters. He looked troubled. His friend frowns. Brutus is always troubled. Thinking is his hobby. The first man snorts a tired laugh. This was different. He kept muttering something about duty. You sip a cup of warm mulsum the tavern owner sets before you. Spiced honey wine that tastes like liquid fireplace comfort. But the warmth doesn't reach the cold spot between your ribs. After a while, you leave the tavern and continue walking. Rome's streets are quieter now. The moon hangs low, painting the buildings in silver blue. Somewhere a dog barks and another answers. A soft wind threads its way between the houses, lifting loose grains of sand from the street. You cross a small bridge over a drainage channel, pausing midway. The water below reflects the moon like a fractured coin. You lean on the railing, letting the stillness settle around you. A group of teenagers passes, laughing softly as they sneak toward the river, probably planning a midnight swim. It's almost reassuring to know someone still feels carefree. Near the Temple of Vesta, you find a priestess trimming a dying flame, coaxing it back to life. She glances at you with calm, unreadable eyes. The fire wavers tonight, she murmurs. It does not like the winds. You're not sure what to say, so you simply nod, offering a friendly but slightly, I am only a tourist in this timeline smile. She tips her head as if she sees something deeper in your hesitation. Moving on, you find a handful of senators gathered discreetly near a colonnade. They are not meeting formally. No official torches, no attendants, no scribes. Their faces glow dimly in the moonlight, their expressions carved by worry. One whispers, "All is arranged?" Another nods. "Tomorrow." A third asks, "And Brutus?" Cassius replies, "He will stand with us." Your stomach drops a little, even though you already know what's coming. Hearing the plan affirmed in the quiet Roman night feels like watching a pendulum swing toward a point it can no longer avoid. You slip away before they notice you. The air grows even colder. A lone torch guttering on a wall sputters violently, then goes out. You blow warm air into your hands, an instinctive gesture that earns a curious glance from a nearby street vendor packing his cart. He grins tiredly. "Chilly night, eh?" You nod. Feels tense. He lowers his voice. Rome knows when something's wrong. The gods whisper through the stones. You decide not to ask how often the stones whisper accurate political analysis. As you turn down another street, you spot a woman tossing salt across her doorstep. A simple ritual meant to purify a home. The pattern she forms is crooked, hurried. She glances over her shoulder nervously and then retreats inside, closing the wooden door with a soft thud. Up ahead, a man lights an oil lamp outside his shop, muttering a prayer to Fortuna. A couple argues in low voices about whether to attend the Senate's public announcements tomorrow. And above, clouds drift slowly across the moon, dimming its glow like a candle wick pinched between fingers. You round one final corner before heading back toward the central streets, and suddenly the entire city feels still, quiet, anticipatory. Rome is not sleeping tonight. It's waiting for the Ides, waiting for dawn, waiting for the moment the world shifts, whether anyone is ready or not. You take a slow breath, letting the chill settle into your lungs. Somewhere in the darkness, a rooster crows too early, a bad omen normally. But tonight, even the birds seem confused about what hour it truly is. And you're standing in a city that feels like it's balanced on a blade. Tomorrow, that blade will fall. Dawn creeps over Rome with a hesitant sort of light, as though even the sun is unsure whether it truly wants to illuminate what this day is about to hold. The air carries that early morning chill you've grown familiar with, but today it feels heavier, like a cool hand pressed gently and ominously against your chest. As you step into the waking streets, you realize the entire city is stirring with a strange, buzzing tension. A morning of portents has arrived. Your first hint of it comes from the birds. A flock of starlings bursts suddenly from the rooftops above you, wheeling in frantic spirals instead of their usual mesmerizing swarms. They scatter in every direction, breaking rhythm like a choir that forgot the notes. A few Romans on the street stop, walking to stare upward. Someone mutters, "Not a good sign," and another replies, "Nothing's been a good sign lately." You continue down the cobblestones, noticing how people move more quickly today. No lazy morning chatter. No lingering at market stalls. Even the vendors who set up at dawn don't bother calling out their usual greetings. One fisherman, stacking baskets of writhing minnows, accidentally crushes a wooden crate under his knee. He curses, then immediately spits over his shoulder 3 times, an old superstition meant to ward off bad luck. He doesn't even notice he spit in the wrong direction. At a street shrine dedicated to Jupiter, a woman kneels with her toddler beside her. She drops a small offering of bread and whispers a prayer. You catch the words, "Protect Caesar," and then, more quietly, "Protect us." It's unclear whether she believes the 2 prayers mean the same thing. You stop at a fountain to splash water on your face. The surface ripples, catching a strange hue, somewhere between gold and gray. A quirky Roman tidbit flickers through your mind. Romans believed water before sunrise held prophetic qualities, and some diviners claimed they could read fate in the wavering surface. You stare at your reflection, half expecting it to blink first. It doesn't, which you take as a neutral omen. Neutral is good today. Ahead, the street bends toward the Domus district. A crowd has already gathered outside Caesar's residence. You approach carefully, weaving between servants, soldiers, and anxious citizens. The buzz of voices reaches you before you see him. Is he coming out? Has he changed his mind? Calpurnia begged him to stay home. My cousin said the chickens refused to eat this morning. That's never good. Never. You blink. Chickens refusing breakfast is, apparently, a significant omen. You file that away under unexpected but on brand for Rome. Finally, Caesar emerges into the doorway, and a ripple moves through the crowd. He looks composed, dignified toga, laurel wreath freshly set, expression firm. But you can see something new in his posture, a subtle stiffness at the shoulders. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's the weight of too many warnings pressing in at once. Calpurnia stands behind him, her expression pale and strained. As he steps forward, she reaches for him once more. "Please," she murmurs. "Stay." The dreams last night were clearer than ever. Caesar gently prizes her fingers from his arm, offering a small, reassuring smile. "The Senate cannot wait, my love." His tone is calm, but you notice how he avoids meeting her eyes for too long. A mainstream historical fact swirls into clarity. On the morning of the Ides, Calpurnia pleaded for Caesar to remain home, shaken by vivid nightmares and ill omens. Ancient writers say Caesar considered agreeing, even instructed attendants to tell the Senate he was unwell, until Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, convinced him otherwise. Right on cue, Decimus arrives. He enters the scene with a bright, controlled smile that feels slightly too polished. "Caesar," he says warmly, "the Senate awaits. They plan to offer honors today. You wouldn't want them to think you distrust them." There's an undertone in his voice, subtle enough that Caesar might not hear it. But you do. A light push wrapped in flattery and obligation. Calpurnia stiffens. Decimus continues conversationally. "Besides, if we let superstitions dictate state affairs, Rome would crumble under every gust of wind." He laughs lightly, and parts of the crowd nod in agreement. Caesar hesitates for only a heartbeat before straightening his shoulders and stepping toward his litter. You watch Calpurnia retreat into the shadows of the doorway, her breath unsteady. You can almost hear her whispering a final prayer. As Caesar's procession begins moving, you follow from a distance. The streets brighten with early sunlight, but the brightness feels thin, washed of warmth. The shadows seem thicker than they should be. A group of augurs stands near the Temple of Mars, examining the entrails of a sacrificed animal. Their expressions turn grim almost instantly. One augur shakes his head sharply. "The omens are unfavorable," he announces. Deeply unfavorable. A man passing by grunts. Rome's been full of bad omens for weeks. What's one more? But the augurs exchange looks that suggest this omen is not just one more. Historians still argue whether the sacrificial omens truly occurred exactly on this day, or whether later writers embellished them to create a narrative crescendo. But today, watching these religious officials frown into a bloody bowl at sunrise, you feel the weight of something ancient and uneasy pressing into the air. You continue trailing Caesar as he heads toward the forum. People glance at him with a mix of admiration and concern. A few bow deeply. A few look away quickly, as though afraid to be caught witnessing him on this day. A young girl steps forward, handing him a small wreath of olive branches. Caesar accepts it with a rare warmth, placing a hand briefly on her head. The scene is almost tender, sweet enough to tighten your throat, but it also feels like a thread of peace tugging against an unraveling rope. A sudden wind sweeps through the street, carrying dust and the faint smell of smoke. Several torches flicker violently. Caesar shields his eyes briefly, and the laurel leaves rustle against his temple. You follow him to a small public square where a philosopher stands atop a platform, speaking to a sparse audience. Power, he says loudly, is a test the gods give twice, once to grant it and once to take it away. His voice is deep, almost theatrical. Several listeners murmur approval. Caesar glances at him, amused. A poet or a pessimist? He mutters under his breath. An attendant shrugs. Perhaps both. You move with the crowd as Caesar approaches the Senate district. Your steps echo faintly as you cross the same stones you walked last night. Everything looks familiar but feels different. Heavier. More final. Then, just before the procession rounds a corner, a man in a simple tunic rushes towards Caesar. Lictors move to block him, but he holds out a tightly folded scroll. A warning, he cries. Please read this. Caesar frowns, takes the scroll, and pockets it without reading. Again, you nearly groan aloud. You had one job, you think, resisting the urge to march over and shake him gently by the shoulders. The man backs away in despair, whispering, "It's all written there, everything." His voice becomes lost in the crowd as you continue walking. The morning sunlight sharpens. The air thins. You feel the city tilting towards something irreversible. A last omen greets you as you approach Pompey's theater. A lone raven perches on a column, staring directly at Caesar. It does not blink. And for the first time today, Caesar hesitates, just slightly, but he still walks forward, into the day that will carve his name into eternity. The streets funnel you forward like a slow-moving tide, carrying you behind Caesar's small retinue as they make their way toward Pompey's theater, where the Senate now meets because the main curia is under reconstruction. The morning light sharpens as you go, glancing off rooftops and marble facades, catching the edges of shields and the glint of polished sandals. The fateful walk to Pompey's theater unfolds not with triumphant fanfare, but with a quiet, uneasy pulse you can feel under your feet, as if Rome itself is trying to steady its heartbeat. Caesar's litter moves at an unhurried pace, borne by attendants who exchange subtle, nervous glances whenever they think no one is watching. You walk alongside the stream of citizens drifting in the same direction, some curious, some anxious, some simply following the momentum of the morning. Rome loves spectacle, but today's feels strangely muted, as though everyone knows the script but no one wants to say the lines aloud. Ahead of you, two street vendors are arguing as they load crates onto a cart. Nothing unusual, until you realize they're arguing specifically about Caesar. "I tell you, it's dangerous," one mutters. "There have been omens all morning." The other scoffs. "You say omens every time a pigeon sneezes. It's called being observant. It's called being dramatic." You can't help smiling faintly, your first of the morning. Rome is full of men who'd fight a lion but faint at a strange cloud pattern. A sudden gust of wind sweeps down the street, and Caesar's attendants lower the curtains of his litter to shield him from dust. You catch a glimpse of his profile through the shifting folds, calm, thoughtful, but heavier somehow, as if each step forward carries the weight of multiple worlds. You wonder whether he's thinking of Calpurnia's pleas, of the soothsayer's warning, or of the Senate's expectations today. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind. Caesar had recently passed laws strengthening his authority and reshaping Rome's political order, and rumors swirled that more changes were coming. Some feared he'd take the crown. Others hoped he would. Many simply didn't know what future he was guiding them toward. And uncertainty, you've noticed, is one of the most volatile forces in Rome. You turn a corner and join a thinning cluster of people converging toward the grand open space surrounding Pompey's theater. The massive structure rises before you. Stone, arches, colonnades. Its facade catching golden flashes of sunlight. The building looks serene, almost dignified, belying the tension simmering beneath its surface. Statues line the entryway, their marble gazes following the crowd with unnerving silence. As you approach, you hear soft whispers among a group of older women standing near a shrine. One crosses herself dramatically. "My sister had a dream last night," she murmurs. "Blood on the Tiber. The river ran red." Another woman gasps. "A vision? No. She just has a very dramatic imagination." Despite yourself, you let out a small laugh. A few nearby Romans glance at you, uncertain whether amusement is allowed today. Closer to the theater, you spot a group of senators waiting under a portico. They stand straighter than usual, shoulders rigid, expressions arranged into masks of stoic professionalism. But their eyes, those flicker with barely concealed anticipation. You recognize several from the villa the previous night. Cassius, Casca, Trebonius, and Brutus, who stands slightly apart, his gaze distant, as if replaying the steps that brought him here. Cassius catches sight of Caesar's approaching retinue and exhales sharply, rolling his shoulders as though preparing for something unpleasant but unavoidable. He touches his cloak, adjusting the fold near his waist where a blade is surely hidden. Casca fidgets, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his fingers drumming against the hilt of his dagger through the fabric. Brutus does none of these things. He simply breathes, slow and steady, eyes clouded with something deeper than fear, doubt maybe, or conviction so heavy it feels like grief. A quirky tidbit flickers into your mind. Romans believed left-footed tripping at the start of a journey was a terrible omen, a sign that the gods disapproved of the endeavor. As Caesar steps down from his litter, you notice his sandal catches briefly on the wooden frame. Not enough to trip him, just enough to jolt him slightly. Cassius notices too, his lips tense. Caesar masks the stumble instantly, but you see the faint irritation tighten his jaw. The senators approach to greet him, offering polite bows and carefully worded compliments. Their voices sound smooth, but the tension beneath them vibrates like plucked strings. Trebonius places a friendly hand on Caesar's shoulder, guiding him subtly toward the theater entrance. "You're expected, Caesar." Everyone is eager to begin. If Caesar hears the strain in his voice, he doesn't show it. Historians still argue whether Caesar sensed danger in these final moments, whether his hesitation at the threshold of Pompey's theater was instinct or coincidence. Some accounts say he paused deliberately. Others say he strode forward confidently. Standing here now, watching him, you sense something in between. A man who has heard every kind of warning, weighed them, and chosen, out of pride or logic, to continue anyway. As Caesar approaches the wide stone steps, a small boy tugs at his mother's sleeve. "Mama," he whispers, "is Caesar safe?" The mother hushes him quickly. "Of course," she lies. "Hurry along." Her eyes avoid the procession entirely. You climb the steps with the crowd, keeping to the edge of the gathering so you can observe everything. A subtle shift happens among the senators. They spread out slightly, forming what looks to anyone else like a respectful escort. But you know the truth. This is positioning. This is choreography. The careful arrangement of men who have spent days rehearsing how to betray a friend. Caesar moves toward the doorway, pausing only once to adjust his toga. You hear him murmur something to an attendant, too quiet to catch. His gaze lifts toward the sky, where the clouds drift in thin, stretched wisps. A single raven circles overhead, as if waiting. Cassius exhales through his teeth. Casca wipes his palms against his tunic. Brutus closes his eyes for a heartbeat. You feel the air tighten. You take a slow breath. And then Caesar steps forward across the threshold of Pompey's theater. The world seems to hold still. No wind, no birds, no distant shouts from the street. Just the faint, echoing sound of sandals on stone as the most powerful man in Rome enters the place where fate has been quietly waiting for him. You remain just outside the entryway, your pulse slowing, your breath catching on the cool morning air. It feels like you've stepped into the skin of history itself, soft, trembling, about to shatter. And inside the theater, the conspirators close in. The air changes the moment you step inside the outer corridor of Pompey's theater. The bustling world of Rome, the carts, the chatter, the restless morning energy, falls away as though you've crossed an invisible line. What remains is a deep, unnatural stillness, the kind that makes you instinctively soften your footsteps. Inside the curious stillness, the world narrows into a set of echoing chambers shaped by marble, shadow, and tension coiled so tightly it might snap with a whisper. You walk toward the temporary Senate chamber, the Curia of Pompey, its entrance framed by tall columns that seem almost suspiciously calm. It's a strange place for the Senate to meet, an annex of a theater, a borrowed room. But Rome has learned to be flexible in its chaos. The marble floor beneath your feet is cool, slightly moist from the morning air, and polished enough that your reflection trails beneath you like a faint ghost. Ahead of you, Caesar moves in steady strides, his toga flowing behind him in soft white waves. A few attendants remain close, but most peel away as he approaches the threshold. Protocol dictates the Senate chamber is sacred space, free of unnecessary escorts. Caesar crosses into the room with a measured breath, and the doorframe seems to swallow the sound of his sandals entirely. Inside, the senators stand arranged in a loose crescent, their togas pristine, their expressions carefully composed. You can feel the air thicken around them, not with dust or humidity, but with intention. Conversations die mid-sentence as Caesar enters, leaving only the faint rustle of fabric and the distant creak of wood beams overhead. A mainstream historical fact settles into your awareness. Pompey's theater was not only a performance space but a political complex, housing gardens, porticos, and this Senate chamber adorned with statues, including, famously, a massive statue of Pompey the Great, Caesar's former ally, Caesar's former rival. The irony of meeting here today is thick enough to chew. And there the statue stands, towering at the far end of the room, carved in heroic posture. Pompey's marble gaze seems to watch everything with cold detachment, or judgment. Some Romans whispered that his spirit lingered here, amused or enraged by what would one day unfold at his feet. Today you can't help glancing back at it more than once. Caesar pauses at the doorway, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Senators bow, some deeper than others. Brutus bows with a solemn dignity. Cassius bows too, though his jaw twitches. Casca's bow is quick, stiff, as if every second spent near Caesar tightens an invisible rope around his chest. Caesar nods in greeting, offering a polite smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Shall we begin?" he asks. But before he can move to his seat, one senator, Metellus Cimber, steps forward with unusually eager stride. He clutches a document in his hand, and his face carries a pleading expression polished to perfection. "Caesar," Metellus says, "I beg you to consider a humble request. My brother awaits your pardon. His fate rests in your hands." A quirky historical tidbit stirs. Metellus's brother, Publius Cimber, had indeed been exiled, and several senators used this petition as the spark to bring Caesar into position for the attack. To the Romans, such petitions were common. To Caesar, this one might have felt exaggerated in timing and tone. Caesar raises an eyebrow. "Metellus, I've already given my answer. Your brother's exile stands." Metellus falls to his knees, dramatically even for Rome. Caesar steps back, startled. Attendants shift uncomfortably near the door. Senators exchange subtle signals, tiny nods and tightening fingers. You feel the tension shift, not rise, shift, like the click of a latch closing. Cassius steps forward next, just a hair closer than polite distance allows. "Caesar," he says, voice mild but brittle at the edges. "It is only mercy we seek." Caesar's gaze narrows. "I am constant as the North Star," he replies. The line feels rehearsed, or perhaps he's said it enough times that it's become his shield. "My decision is firm." Then Brutus steps forward, and the room stops. Even the dust motes seem to pause midair. Brutus speaks softly, his tone almost apologetic. "Caesar, grant this one request. For the sake of Rome." You watch Caesar's face shift, surprise, confusion, something like quiet hurt. It's the first time you've seen him falter today. He steps back again, and senators surge subtly around him, their formation tightening like a closing fist. Historians still argue whether Caesar understood what was happening at this exact moment, whether he recognized the trap unfolding around him or whether he believed these were merely overzealous petitions. Some say he saw the danger too late. Others insist he sensed it all along but chose to face it with dignity. Here, standing beside history itself, you sense the truth lives in the flicker of Caesar's eyes. A moment of realization, a moment of disbelief. Casca moves behind him, his hand trembling slightly as it reaches beneath his toga. He steps closer, too close. Caesar turns his head, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" he begins, and the room inhales. Not yet striking, not yet erupting, but ready. Senators shift subtly, surrounding Caesar in a tightening crescent. Metellus grips Caesar's toga, pulling at the folds as though in desperate supplication. But you know, and Caesar must now know, it's not a plea. It's positioning. Caesar stiffens. His voice sharpens. "This is violence," he warns. "Not petition." Your pulse hammers. Trebonius leads Antony away from the chamber entrance, engaging him in a long, exaggerated conversation, another part of the plan. Antony doesn't notice the deception. He gestures animatedly, unaware his absence seals Caesar's fate. A servant near the doorway senses something is wrong and moves to step forward. A senator blocks him with a firm hand and a forced smile. "The Senate is in session," he says. "Wait outside." Everything grows quieter. So quiet you can hear the faint hum of the city beyond the stone walls, the soft roll of carts, the distant calls of merchants, life continuing as though nothing extraordinary is happening inside one of Rome's most consequential rooms. Caesar turns toward Brutus again, searching his face for explanation, for reassurance, for anything human to cling to. Brutus cannot meet his gaze. His jaw trembles, but he stays in place. Cassius shifts his weight. Casca's hand tightens on the concealed dagger. Senators edge closer still. You stand against a pillar, invisible in plain sight, heart thudding, breath held tight in your throat. Pompey's statue looms behind Caesar, its marble surface gleaming softly in the filtered light. A raven croaks outside the window. A senator clears his throat. The air grows unbearably dense, and everything in the curia, the whispers, the omens, the tension gathering over days and nights, finally converges in this silent, suspended moment. The moment right before history breaks open. The chamber seems to collapse inward, not physically, but in sensation, as if every wall, every echo, every shadow draws tighter around the central point where Caesar stands. You feel it in your ribs, in your breath, in the delicate tremor of the marble beneath your sandals. Blades in the shadows is no longer a metaphor. It is a presence, thickening the air like storm clouds gathering in the lungs of the room. For a heartbeat, one impossibly stretched, fragile heartbeat, nothing happens. Casca stands behind Caesar, his hand frozen inside the fold of his toga where the dagger waits. Cassius shifts beside him, shoulders squared, eyes darting. Brutus holds himself unervingly still, his face carved into mask-like calm, though you see a quick, betraying pulse twitch along his jawline. Caesar glances at Brutus again, seeking clarity, maybe reassurance, or perhaps the simple comfort of recognition. But Brutus doesn't break, doesn't blink, doesn't breathe. The moment hangs between them like a blade suspended by a single hair. And then Casca moves. The motion is abrupt, jagged, almost desperate, nothing like the clean, decisive strike of a trained soldier. He lunges, pushing past Metellus's grip on Caesar's toga, and a silver glint flashes in the dim chamber light. Casca thrusts his dagger forward, aiming for Caesar's neck. Caesar reacts instantly, faster than you expect from a man of his age and injuries. He jerks sideways, and the blade glances across his shoulder instead of finding its mark. The sound is sickeningly soft, a muted tear of fabric and skin. Caesar gasps, more in shock than pain. "You villain, Casca!" he shouts, voice surging through the chamber. "What are you doing?" That line, recorded in multiple accounts, lands sharp in your mind. A mainstream historical fact. Caesar's earliest defenders described him as reacting with outrage, not fear, during the first strike. And standing here now, you believe it. His eyes blaze with disbelief that borders on fury. Casca staggers back, rattled. "Help me, brother," he cries. Not to Caesar, but to the other conspirators. His voice cracks, thin and frantic. For a fleeting moment, he looks like a man terrified by his own actions. Then the others move. Cassius lunges first, his dagger catching the light as he drives it towards Caesar's ribs. Caesar turns, taking the blow across his forearm instead. Another senator, Cinna, slashes forward, his blade scraping Caesar's side. A third man attempts to grab Caesar's toga, anchoring him for a cleaner strike. Chaos erupts. Not a coordinated attack, but a frantic tangle of bodies and cloth and glinting metal. The conspirators crowd around Caesar, their movements frantic, ungraceful, almost clumsy. These are not professional assassins. They are politicians wielding knives with the wild energy of men trying to wrestle fate itself. Caesar tries to defend himself. He pushes back against the press of bodies, grabbing one senator's wrist, twisting hard enough to make him cry out. He catches Casca's dagger hand and shoves it aside. He shouts something you can't fully hear. The chamber echoes too violently now, but the tone is unmistakable. Disbelief sharpened into anger. A quirky historical tidbit rises at the edges of your mind. Some Romans later joked grimly that Caesar died less from precise assassination and more from being enthusiastically stabbed by men and used to combat. Watching the flailing arms and misangled thrusts, you realize this dark humor isn't entirely inaccurate. But then Brutus steps forward. He's slower than the others, more deliberate. His dagger stays hidden for a long moment before he finally draws it. Caesar sees him. Their eyes lock. Everything in the chamber stills. Even the conspirators pause, struck by the sudden gravity of that gaze. The soft rustle of cloth, the shuffled feet, the ragged breathing. Everything dims into the background. Caesar's face shifts, not just with pain, but with a betrayal so profound it seems to hollow him from within. "You too, brute." "It too, brute?" Or perhaps something simpler, something more deeply human. "You as well, my child?" Historians still argue what Caesar actually said, if he said anything at all. Some claim he fell silent. Others claim he spoke Brutus's name. Many insist Shakespeare's phrase is the poetic invention we cling to because betrayal this intimate feels like it must come with a final line. But here, in the chamber's suffocating stillness, you see everything you need in Caesar's expression. Words or no words, the meaning is the same. Brutus steps closer. His dagger trembles. Then he drives it forward. Not the deepest wound, not the most lethal, but the symbolic one. The one that breaks Caesar's last defense. The flurry resumes instantly. Blades flash again, slicing into the folds of Caesar's toga as he staggers under the cluster of striking arms. He's pushed backward, toward Pompey's statue. His feet scrape desperately across the floor. His toga slips from his shoulder, heavy with blood. He tries to brace himself on something, anything, but the world around him is falling inward. A senator shoves him. Another grabs his arm. Someone's blade misses entirely and clatters across the marble in a ringing arc. Another catches Caesar just above the ribs. His breath hitches sharply. He stumbles. He reaches out. His fingers brush the base of Pompey's statue. And then, slowly, Like a tree that has taken one blow too many, Caesar collapses to the floor. His toga billows around him, pooling in folds that resemble waves frozen mid-crest. The conspirators continue striking even as he falls, some hitting flesh, some hitting cloth, some hitting the marble floor beneath him. Finally, the frenzy ebbs. The senators step back, panting, smeared with flecks of crimson that look almost black in the dim light. The room goes silent again, violently silent. The kind of silence that feels like a sound in itself. Caesar no longer moves. One by one, the conspirators lower their blades. Casca wipes his hand on his toga, trembling. Cassius swallows hard. Cinna mutters a prayer under his breath. Brutus stands utterly still, staring down at the man he just helped kill. His expression hollow in a way that suggests he expected to feel righteous, but instead feels nothing but the vast echo of his own choice. You remain pressed against your pillar, heart pounding so hard you feel it in your fingertips. Outside, through the high, narrow windows, sunlight begins to creep across the marble floor, catching the edges of Pompey's statue, gilding it. The light touches Caesar last. A breeze sweeps through the theater's corridors. And for a moment, just a moment, you could swear the whole city inhales in shock. For a long moment, the Curia feels suspended outside of time, frozen in a tableau of still bodies, cooling blood, and a silence so deep it presses against your ears. But slowly, like heat returning to numb limbs, the world begins to move again. Senators shift their weight. Someone exhales shakily. Casca leans against a column as though he might collapse. Caesar's toga settles around him like a wilting banner. And then, the quiet breaks open as if the entire building suddenly remembers how to breathe. The collapse of a republic doesn't happen with a thunderclap. It begins right here, in these thin, trembling moments after the daggers fall. Brutus is the first to step forward. His sandals whisper across the marble. He kneels beside Caesar, not in grief exactly, but in something that looks painfully close to it. His hand hovers over Caesar's arm before withdrawing, fingers curling inward as if scorched. The expression on Brutus's face is impossible to read fully. Pride, horror, relief, regret, maybe all of them braided together. "We are free," Cassius murmurs, wiping sweat from his brow. "Rome is free again." He says it with conviction, but his voice quivers, betraying the truth. He's trying to convince himself. Casca mutters something about tyranny, about justice, but his hands still shake. A few senators whisper prayers. Others stare at their daggers as though unsure how those blades ended up in their hands. A mainstream historical fact slots into your awareness. The conspirators believed the Roman people would welcome Caesar's assassination, seeing it as the restoration of the old republic. They imagined crowds cheering, senators praising their courage, statues erected in their honor. They thought they'd be hailed not as murderers but as liberators. But the reality unfolding now is far more complicated. A senator near the door gasps, not dramatically, more like a person who finally lets go of a breath held too long. "We should leave," he whispers, before the crowd gathers. Trebonius appears in the doorway, looking alarmed. Antony is demanding to enter. He knows something is wrong. Cassius stiffens. "Keep him out. Just a little longer." Trebonius nods and vanishes again, the tension in his steps revealing the unraveling of their plan. You watch the conspirators rearrange themselves, trying to regain composure. Brutus rises slowly, wiping a streak of blood from his hand onto his toga. He looks physically ill. "We must speak to the people," he says. "We must explain what we've done." "You think they'll listen?" Casca snaps, panic rising. "They must," Brutus replies. "For Rome's sake." A quirky historical tidbit floats into your mind. Some Romans believed blood of a great man carried a kind of power, and that stepping in it could bring either fortune or doom. As the conspirators cluster together, several of them inadvertently track Caesar's blood across the marble in dark smudges. You're fairly sure no one is thinking about magical fortune right now. Mostly they look concerned about how to avoid being torn apart by an angry crowd. The senators decide to move. They form a loose procession around Brutus and Cassius, each trying to mimic the dignity expected of a Roman statesman, though the shaking hands and pallid faces undermine the effort completely. Brutus urges them, "Hold your heads high. We did this for the Republic." His voice cracks at the edges, not from doubt, but from the weight of all that doubt is beginning to mean. As they exit the curia, sunlight spills over their blood-stained hands and togas. More than one senator flinches at the sight. You linger for a moment longer, gazing at Caesar's still form beneath Pompey's statue. The contrast is jarring. Caesar, dressed in white, now streaked with dark red. Pompey carved in pristine marble above him, forever frozen in heroic triumph. Historians still argue whether Caesar fell deliberately at the base of Pompey's statue, whether the conspirators dragged him there, or whether the moment simply aligned with uncanny symbolism. But the image remains powerful. Two rivals reunited in the moment Rome unravels. A breeze flickers through the open doorway, stirring Caesar's laurel wreath where it rests slightly askew on the floor. The soft rustle seems almost like a sigh. Finally, you step out into the corridor. The world outside has begun to crack open. People gather in clumps, faces tight with fear and confusion. Rumors ripple through the space like wildfire. Caesar has been attacked. No, he survived. They say Brutus struck the blow. Impossible, Brutus loved him. The Senate has restored the Republic. No, Rome will fall into chaos. The crowd surges in uncertainty. A woman grips her child closer. A man stumbles into a column, pale as chalk. Two soldiers argue about whether they're expected to defend the senators or arrest them. Voices clash, rise, spin out of control like sparks caught on the wind. You see Brutus step forward, raising his hands to speak, but the noise swallows him whole. Cassius tries as well, shouting something about liberty and tyranny, but people recoil instead of applauding. They look at the daggers, at the blood, at the tremor in Cassius's stance. Something crucial becomes clear. Whatever the conspirators believed the people would feel, this isn't it. A group of farmers whispers angrily. A baker mutters, "He fed us. He forgave debts. He expanded citizenship." A young man clenches his fists. He won wars while these men hid behind scrolls. You watch Brutus visibly falter. He expected debate. He expected moral support. He did not expect fear. He certainly did not expect hostility. Then, from down the steps, a deep voice bellows, "Where is Caesar?" Mark Antony. He appears like a storm given human shape, eyes sharp, jaw set, movements precise and deliberate. He pushes through the crowd, fists clenched, looking every bit the soldier he once was. When Trebonius attempts to intercept him, Antony growls, "Move!" Trebonius moves. Antony stops at the threshold of the curia, staring into the dim room. He sees the blood first, then he sees Caesar. His face drains of color, then flushes deep red. His breathing sharpens. You step back. You don't want to be near him right now. Antony grieving is like watching a lion decide who deserves the first bite. He turns slowly toward Brutus and the conspirators, expression unreadable. Brutus steps forward, palms open, trying to make peace. "Antony, we meant no." "Silence," Antony says, soft as a blade sliding free of a sheath. The conspirators freeze. You realize something then. Something subtle, quiet, but powerful. Antony is no longer just Caesar's friend. He is the gravitational center around which Rome will spin next. His silence is more threatening than any shouted accusation. The collapse of the Republic isn't loud. It isn't a sudden crash. It's this. The look in Antony's eyes, the tremor in the crowd, the senators realizing too late that removing Caesar was only the beginning of something far more uncontrollable. Outside the curia, Rome stirs like a wounded animal. Inside your chest, your heartbeat thuds in uneasy rhythm with the cities. History has cracked open, and the world is about to pour through. The air outside the curia feels charged, like the moment after lightning strikes but before the thunder arrives. Citizens cluster together in tight knots, whispering anxiously, their eyes darting between the blood-stained senators and the darkened doorway where Caesar still lies. In the center of it all stands Mark Antony, shoulders squared, breath steadying with effort. Mark Antony takes the stage, not by proclamation or ceremony, but by the sheer gravitational pull of a man whose grief is sharpening into purpose. You watch him, trying to read the storm gathering behind his eyes. Antony's reputation precedes him. Soldier, orator, loyal friend, occasional party enthusiast. Rome's version of that friend who always brings too much energy to a quiet dinner. But none of that fits him right now. He stands absolutely still, like a pillar carved from outrage. Brutus approaches first, stepping forward with hands raised gently, like someone calming a startled horse. His face is taut with worry, but his voice, when it emerges, tries for calm dignity. "Antony," he says softly, "we acted for the liberty of Rome." Antony's eyes narrow, not theatrically, just enough to let you feel the heat behind them. "Liberty?" he repeats quietly. "I find little liberty in the body of a murdered friend." Cassius shifts, gripping the folds of his toga. "We did what had to be done," he insists. "Rome cannot be ruled by a king." Antony looks at him with an expression that could curdle wine. Caesar was no king. A mainstream historical fact drifts to the front of your mind. Antony had been fiercely loyal to Caesar, defending him politically and militarily, and was appointed co-consul. Several accounts say that Antony genuinely admired Caesar, not just the power he held, but the charisma and loyalty he inspired. Standing here now, you believe it. This is not cold, calculated fury. This is personal. Brutus tries again. "Antony, hear us. Let us speak plainly. Let us explain our reasons." Antony turns his head just slightly, studying Brutus. The anger in his expression softens. Only softened, never erased. "I will listen," he says slowly, "because it is you who ask it." His tone carries a reluctant respect, an acknowledgement of their long-standing friendship. But then he adds, "And because I must know the shape of the world you have made." The conspirators ease visibly. Antony is not attacking, not shouting, not calling for the crowd to swarm them. Relief ripples through the group. Too quickly, too foolishly. You can feel it, though. Antony is not calming. He is calculating. A quirky tidbit flickers through your thoughts, almost absurd in the gravity of the moment. Romans believed you could tell a person's true intentions by watching which foot they stepped forward with first. Antony steps with his left foot, traditionally a sign of caution, even hostility. The conspirators don't notice, but you do. Antony slowly extends his hand, not in friendship, but in ritual. "If your intentions were honorable, then let me take your hands. Let me stand beside you as a fellow Roman." Cassius hesitates only a moment before clasping Antony's palm. Casca follows with stiff reluctance. Then Cinna. Then Trebonius, Decimus, and the rest. Brutus steps last, placing his hand gently into Antony's grip. Antony's face softens. His voice, when he speaks, is startlingly calm. "Friends," he says, except it lands differently, like a knife wrapped in silk. Historians still argue whether Antony's handshake was genuine diplomacy or an early move in a masterfully executed revenge. Some claim he feared being killed next and needed to stall. Others believe he was already forging the political theater that would reshape Rome. Watching him now, you suspect both may be true. His grief is real. His fury is real. But so is the glint of strategy beginning to ignite behind his eyes. The crowd around you murmurs uneasily. People are confused, frightened, unsure whether Antony's acceptance of the conspirators means they, too, should quell their outrage. A few senators slip away quietly. A pair of soldiers whisper heatedly about rising tensions. A merchant mutters, "This is not over, not even close." Antony steps toward the curia doorway. "Let me see him," he demands. Brutus exhales. "Of course." They move aside, forming a narrow path. You follow at the edge of the group as Antony enters the dim chamber. Light filters in just enough to illuminate Caesar's body, still crumpled beneath Pompey's statue. The laurel wreath lies beside him, His toga is marred with so many cuts it barely resembles cloth. Antony falls to one knee. He reaches out, slowly, reverently, and touches Caesar's hand. His thumb brushes over the cooling skin. His expression collapses, just for a moment, into raw grief. His breath trembles. You feel something tighten in your chest in response. Whatever Caesar was to Rome, to Antony he was something profoundly human. He whispers something you don't quite catch. A prayer? Promise? A goodbye? Then, gradually, Antony rises. The grief on his face calcifies into something far more dangerous. When he turns back toward the conspirators, he is composed, controlled, devastatingly articulate. "If you ask it of me," he says, voice steady as polished stone, "I will not oppose your actions. I will not incite the people. I will stand beside you as Rome rebuilds." Cassius looks relieved. Brutus nods. Several conspirators exhale audibly, shoulders lowering. But Antony continues, lifting a single finger. "I ask one thing in return." Cassius tenses. "Name it." "I wish," Antony says carefully, "to speak at Caesar's funeral." A hush ripples through the room. Brutus answers immediately. "Of course. You deserve that right." Cassius whirls toward him, eyes wide with alarm. "Brutus, no. He will turn the people against us." Brutus shakes his head. "No. Antony is an honorable man. He will speak what is true." You resist the very strong urge to mutter, "Tell that to the future." Antony dips his head. "Thank you, Brutus." His expression remains serene. His eyes do not. As they exit the theater, the crowd swells again. Voices rise in confusion and fear. Someone sobs. Someone shouts. Someone else mutters that the gods are punishing Rome. Antony stands at the top of the steps beside Brutus and Cassius, the morning sun casting his silhouette in stark relief. In this moment you see it clearly. The conspirators believe they saved the Republic. Antony believes they killed it. And the people, they don't know what to believe yet, but they will, soon, because Antony is about to show them exactly what to feel. And when he does, Rome will ignite. You follow the crowd as it swells and coils through the forum, gathering like a tide that hasn't decided yet whether it will rise gently or crash violently over Rome. The conspirators move as a loose formation through the streets, Brutus and Cassius at their head, Antony walking slightly behind them, close enough to appear cooperative, far enough that no one mistakes him for an ally. The city trembles toward war not with marching legions or clashing steel, but with whispers, glances, and the uneasy shiver running beneath every sandal pressing into the stones. Word of Caesar's death spreads faster than sound. By the time you reach the open forum, a crowd of hundreds has already assembled. Some Romans are crying openly. Others shout questions, demands, accusations, at the conspirators, at the sky, at each other. The morning sun glares bright now, its heat unseasonably sharp, turning sweat sticky against your temples. Even the light feels aggressive today. Brutus steps forward, hands raised for calm. "People of Rome," he begins, voice steady. "We acted not in malice but in love of liberty." Cassius flanks him, trying to look confident but betraying nerves in the stiff set of his shoulders. Several senators who supported the conspiracy spread out to appear unified. A few wear expressions that scream internal panic. The crowd hushes, but only barely. A woman near you mutters, "Liberty? He fed us. He protected us." A man beside her growls, "If Caesar was a tyrant, he was a generous one." Someone else shouts, "Where is Antony? Let him speak." Brutus continues, trying to steady the city by sheer force of sincerity. His voice softens, appealing to honor, reason, virtue. You can hear the logic clear, well-structured, built on the ancient ideals of the Republic. But logic is fragile when held up against blood and fear. Caesar's body still lies in the Curia, cooling under Pompey's statue. Logic did not follow him there. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Brutus believed the assassination would restore Rome to its noble past, a republic governed by virtue, not by a single ruler. Yet he underestimated how deeply Caesar's popularity had woven itself into Roman identity. Many saw Caesar not as a threat to freedom but as a shield against chaos. And today, Rome feels the chaos beginning to seep in. Near the temple of Castor and Pollux, a group of soldiers argues about their loyalties. Caesar paid us well, one says. Better than the Senate ever did. Another spits on the ground. Better alive than dead, apparently. Their centurion watches silently, jaw tight, clearly unsure which side the city will demand he take. A quirky tidbit pops at the edge of your mind, almost absurd in the moment. Romans believed that when flocks of birds wheeled in chaotic patterns, it meant the gods were warning the city of upheaval. Overhead now, a cluster of birds circles erratically, bumping into one another, scattering, regrouping. Several people point upward, trembling. Brutus steps down from the podium, and Cassius takes his place. His tone is sharper, more defensive, but less convincing. He tries to appeal to fear of tyranny, fear of monarchy, but the crowd's fear is already pointed elsewhere. A stone is thrown, not at the conspirators but in frustration. It clatters across the marble and rolls to Cassius's feet. His face reddens. Antony steps forward. Just a step. Just enough. The crowd surges toward him. Hopeful, angry, desperate to hear from someone who feels like a bridge between what Rome has lost and whatever it's becoming. Brutus sees this and gestures gently for Antony to join them. Cassius visibly stiffens, but it's too late. Antony ascends the steps with the practiced grace of a man who understands exactly how much power now rests inside his voice. Romans, he says, not shouting, not even projecting, just speaking with a gravity that pulls every ear toward him. You loved Caesar, and I loved him. Silence. You've never felt silence like this, thick, electric, shaking at the edges. Antony continues. Brutus says he was ambitious. His tone holds curiosity, not accusation. If it were so, then Caesar answered that ambition with generosity. He brought wealth to Rome. He extended citizenship. He pardoned his enemies. His eyes flick subtle, sharp, toward Cassius. Then Antony turns to the conspirators. And these men, he says gently, are honorable. The crowd rustles. Some shift uneasily. Others frown. The phrase feels wrong, heavy with unspoken meaning. Antony repeats it, slowly, warmly, dangerously. They are honorable men. Historians still argue how much of Antony's funeral rhetoric was spontaneous and how much was masterful manipulation. But here, watching him now, you understand it wasn't either slash or. Antony is a man so alive with grief, fury, and political brilliance that every word he speaks draws strength from all three. Brutus, who is earnest but not a strategist, doesn't see the trap tightening. Cassius sees it, but too late. Antony steps closer to the crowd. I ask nothing of you, he says, only that you look at Caesar's wounds, at the marks of every blade. His hand lifts, palm outward. Only that you ask yourselves if this violence is what you wish Rome to become. A cry breaks out from somewhere deep in the crowd. Then another. The tension ripples outward like shockwaves. People shove forward, shouting demands for Caesar's body, others yelling threats at the conspirators. The air takes on the energy of a storm seconds from breaking apart. The conspirators retreat slightly. Brutus raises his hands, pleading again for calm, but calm has slipped through Rome's fingers. Cassius mutters something furious under his breath, face twisted. Antony descends the steps, disappearing into the press of the crowd, but his influence lingers like heat after lightning. People begin to chant. Not in unison yet, but gathering force. Caesar! Vengeance! Justice! Burn the traitors! Rome roars. A stone strikes a column. Someone flips a vendor's stall. A small fire ignites in a pile of discarded cloth. Soldiers scramble, trying to restore order, but the crowd surges around them like water. The city is fracturing. No, it's transforming. You move with the tide, pushed and pulled by the momentum of a people waking to rage. Nearby, a young man climbs a statue pedestal and shouts, Brutus killed a father of Rome. Another responds, Antony will avenge him. A third screams, to the houses of the conspirators. You glance back at Brutus and Cassius. They stand pale and shaken, surrounded by supporters who suddenly look very few in number. Their noble intentions, their carefully rehearsed speeches, none of it matters now. The city has chosen emotion over philosophy, and Rome, when emotional, tends to burn things. As you're swept along the edge of the square, you catch sight of Antony slipping into a side street, a small group of loyal soldiers following. His expression is fierce, not triumphant, not gleeful, but determined, forged in fire. He is no longer just mourning. He is preparing. The first embers of civil war glow faintly beneath the city's surface, and Rome, trembling on the edge of chaos, is ready to ignite. The streets of Rome heave like a living thing, breathing, convulsing, crying out in waves of fury and grief that roll from the Forum to the farthest alleys. By the time you reach the Capitoline slope, the city feels transformed, as though the buildings themselves are vibrating with unrest. Legacy in the long night begins not with quiet reflection, but with the raw shock of a world trying to understand what has been taken from it, and what has been set loose in its place. You pass a crowd gathered around a hastily raised platform where Caesar's body, prepared for public display, is being moved. His toga, torn and stained, has been laid across a wooden bier. The blood-darkened fabric flutters in the breeze, and with each ripple, the crowd murmurs louder. People are pushing closer, pointing at the wounds, muttering in disbelief. Someone cries out, "They butchered him!" Another sobs openly. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Caesar's funeral sparked one of the most explosive public reactions in Roman history, culminating in riots, arson, and a near-complete political realignment. Antony's speech did not simply sway sentiment, it detonated it. You spot Antony nearby, conferring with a pair of soldiers, his expression taut. He glances toward Caesar's bier with a mixture of sorrow and calculation. Grief still clings to him, but it has shifted into something more solid, an engine humming beneath his ribs. He's already thinking about what comes next, what must come next. Near you, two older men argue heatedly. He wanted to be king. He fed the city. He forgave our debts. He ruled too long. He saved Rome. Their voices blend with dozens more, a cacophony of argument and fear. The city isn't unified in grief or anger. It's fractured, splintered into jagged pieces that no one, not even the Senate, knows how to hold together. The conspirators, now huddled on the temple steps, exchange looks of mounting dread. Brutus attempts once more to speak to the crowd, but his words scatter like dust in the wind. Cassius places a steadying hand on his arm, but his own expression is drawn tight, etched with realization. A quirky historical tidbit nudges at you. Romans often believed that dying without proper funeral rites doomed a soul to wander, and some whispered that Caesar's restless spirit would haunt Rome until justice or vengeance was delivered. Looking at the crowd now, you suspect these whispers may become self-fulfilling. You drift closer to the bier, where a small girl, no more than 8, stares at the blood-soaked toga with wide eyes. Her mother pulls her close. "Remember him," she whispers. "Whatever comes next will be because of him." The words land heavy in the air, simple, truthful, prophetic. Antony steps onto the platform. The crowd hushes immediately, not out of discipline but out of instinct. His presence commands attention the way a storm commands the sky. He lifts his hands slowly, palms outward, inviting quiet. "Romans," he begins, voice rich and steady. "Look upon him. Look upon the man who led your armies, who filled your granaries, who forgave every enemy who knelt before him." He gestures toward the toga. "These wounds, you have seen them. You know whose blades made them." The crowd ripples with heat, whispers turning into low cries. "Caesar loved Rome," Antony continues, "and Rome loved him. Will you allow his killers to walk free?" Shouts erupt. "No! Justice! Burn their houses!" Brutus flinches. Cassius clenches his jaw. Other conspirators exchange panicked glances. This moment, this single spark, is what they feared when Antony asked to speak at the funeral. And yet, because Brutus trusted him, Antony now shapes the city like a potter molding wet clay. Historians still argue whether Antony intended full-scale revolt or merely sought to undermine the conspirators. But here, witnessing the fire in his eyes, you sense that vengeance, justice, and political opportunity have merged into one unstoppable force. The crowd surges closer to the platform. Antony lifts a hand, and they fall silent again. Miraculously, instantly. "I ask only this," he says. "Let Rome decide Caesar's fate. Let you, the people he loved, carry him to his rest." The crowd explodes, not in violence yet, but in purpose. People scramble to gather wood, cloth, anything that will burn. A funeral pyre is constructed right in the center of the forum, wildly, chaotically, with no order except the fierce desire to honor Caesar. As flames rise, people begin tossing offerings. Flowers, coins, pieces of clothing. Someone throws in a soldier's helmet. Another offers a scroll of poetry. A woman throws in her wedding veil, tears streaming down her face. The fire roars higher. The conspirators retreat further up the steps, faces pale as ash. Brutus grips Cassius's arm. "We must leave," he murmurs. "Rome is not safe for us." Cassius nods grimly. "Nor will it be again." You follow the movement of the crowd, watching the pyre blaze brighter. Heat washes across your face. Sparks swirl upward like frantic stars. The smoke climbs into the open sky, a dark pillar rising above Rome. A group of young men begins chanting Caesar's name. The chant spreads, deepens, intensifies. Soon, the entire forum echoes with his memory, his myth, his legacy made larger in death than in life. And beneath it all, the city shifts. The republic, already fragile, fractures further. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. Somewhere else, a window shatters. Soldiers rush to restrain rioters. Others join them. Chaos ripples outward. You stand at the edge of the forum, the fire's glow lighting your face, your heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of a city redefining itself. You think of Calpurnia's warnings, the soothsayer's quiet prophecy, the senator's pride, Caesar's stride through storms, Brutus's conflicted heart, Antony's rising fury. Everything converges into this. The end of Caesar is the beginning of something larger, something darker, something inevitable. Rome has crossed a threshold, and now the long night begins. One not of sleep, but of civil war, shifting alliances, and the relentless forging of an empire that Caesar himself will never see, but will forever define. And now, as the flames of Caesar's pyre soften in your imagination, I want you to slowly let go of the noise, the tension, the turmoil of Rome. Picture the forum from a distance. Its marble washed in fading firelight, its shouts replaced by a soft, drifting hum as the night settles back into itself. Let the edges of the city blur, the sharpness of its chaos dimming into something quieter, something far away. You breathe slowly, in and out. Feel your shoulders loosen. Feel the weight of history melt from your chest. Rome becomes only a silhouette now, a gentle outline against the night sky. The smoke rising from the pyre thins into a soft trail, and the chanting voices fade like echoes slipping into water. Even the glow of the flames begins to soften, turning from fierce orange to a warm ember glow. Steady, calm, almost like a lantern guiding you back toward rest. Let your mind drift with that glow. Let it slow your thoughts, lengthen them, smooth their edges. You're no longer standing in the heat of the forum or the swirl of a restless crowd. You're somewhere quieter now, somewhere safe, where the only responsibility you have is to relax. Imagine the night breeze brushing against you. Cool, gentle, reassuring. Imagine the torches dimming one by one until only the stars remain. The city's heartbeat quiets. Yours does too. And in this softened twilight of imagination, you can release the last threads of tension. Let them fall away. Let the story settle behind you like a cloak gently slipping off your shoulders. You're drifting now, slowly, peacefully, into a quieter world than Rome ever knew.